verdaderamente una de las personalidades más influyentes, contemporáneas, con aportes muy importantes en áreas de trabajo sobre las que este foro de Innovación de las Américas, esta tercera edición del Foro de Innovación de las Américas, trata de trabajar. Es, sin lugar a dudas, su presencia uno de los acontecimientos que además, como profesionales de la economía, muchos de nosotros agradecemos, porque no con frecuencia en nuestro país tenemos la oportunidad de escuchar una presentación de primera mano de una personalidad como el profesor Dosi, y además de tener múltiples instancias de intercambio como las que permite la propia existencia, la propia organización de un foro de este tipo. Así que, profesor, muchas gracias por acompañarnos. El trabajo del profesor Dosi tiene múltiples derivaciones, todas ellas de enorme significación práctica y de enorme influencia intelectual. Pero permítame detenerme por un momento en lo que a mi entender constituye el principal elemento sustantivo de lo que ha sido la reflexión que el profesor Dosi y muchos de sus colaboradores han aportado a la ciencia económica, a la disciplina económica. Muchos de los economistas entre los cuales me encuentro nos hemos formado en la economía, en los preceptos de la economía, en lo que podríamos llamar la teoría económica, en la que los problemas comportamentales, tanto los que tienen que ver con el comportamiento de los consumidores como el comportamiento de las empresas, y en particular los comportamientos que tienen significación desde el punto de vista tecnológico, constituyen prácticamente datos de la realidad que no merecen contrastación empírica, ni su contrastación empírica aporta, según la teoría prevaleciente, demasiado para entender lo que pasa en los sistemas económicos. De algún modo, el pensamiento convencional en economía ha hecho de la tecnología un problema casi accesorio, en el cual las funciones de producción, o lo que podríamos llamar las tecnologías en las cuales se apoyan las decisiones de producción de las empresas, son datos que no aportan esencialmente nada para comprender las características de las dinámicas de las organizaciones económicas. Y yo creo que la significación más importante que tienen los aportes realizados por la corriente de pensamiento que integra el profesor Dosi es haber demostrado y haber ilustrado respecto a que no es en absoluto trivial el problema de cómo se gestan los cambios tecnológicos, cómo se gestan, en definitiva, las decisiones empresariales y las decisiones de las organizaciones económicas que tienen que ver con la introducción de cambios en los sistemas de producción y en la organización del trabajo. Y cuando uno entiende que la tecnología es mucho más que un dato de la realidad, entiende la política económica que tiene que influir o que trata de influir sobre las decisiones económicas de un modo sustancialmente diferente. Deja de ser una política económica que solo trata de incentivar comportamientos que son incapaces de transformar la estructura económica subyacente y que tratan simplemente de multiplicar la capacidad de producir, que tratan de multiplicar decisiones que puedan alentar eventualmente la acumulación del capital o la acumulación de otros factores de producción. Cuando uno centra el problema de la política económica, que trata de influir sobre la innovación y los procesos de organización de la producción, como una actividad no trivial en absoluto, pero que trata de entender que en definitiva de lo que se trata es de influir sobre las capacidades de las personas, de las organizaciones y esencialmente sobre aquellas decisiones de las personas y las organizaciones que tienen que gestarse en un ambiente y en unas condiciones que sean propicias para que esas transformaciones efectivamente impacten sobre la realidad económica. Esta línea de pensamiento sin lugar a duda tiene implicaciones diferentes en términos de las políticas a sugerir y de la forma que se comprende la dinámica del sistema en el que nosotros estamos inmersos. Implica de algún modo razonar en términos de qué manera las políticas públicas son capaces de influir sobre los procesos de gestación y acumulación de capacidades y no sobre los procesos de acumulación y gestación de capital físico o de infraestructuras. No se trata de algún modo de describir el problema de las tecnologías y las formas en que ellas se aplican en la práctica, sino que tienen en definitiva una enorme potencialidad para ellas mismas ser gestadoras de capacidades que de otro modo no existirían. Por tanto, los aportes en materia de política industrial que se realizan desde este enfoque mucho más centrado en dudar de que los problemas tecnológicos son un dato de la realidad y entender de que ellos finalmente son procesos complejos e incentivables más allá de lo que es la trivialidad con la que la teoría convencional hace su análisis de tecnologías y preferencias de los actores económicos. Este, si se quiere, es el núcleo medular de lo que es la matriz de pensamiento que nos ha ayudado a incorporar el profesor Dosi y muchos de sus colaboradores. Y hay un aspecto en particular que está mencionado en el título de esta presentación que creo que tiene especial significación para entender de qué naturaleza es la reflexión y de qué naturaleza es la preocupación que inspira los aportes realizados desde esta forma de entender los procesos de innovación y los procesos de cambio. Y es entender que detrás de estos procesos hay una economía política de una riqueza y de una significación muy especial, que hace a la realidad de cómo las políticas operan, pero hace a la relación entre el interés general y el interés particular. Evidentemente, toda vez que unas políticas como son las políticas industriales, las políticas de promoción de la inversión, las políticas de promoción de la innovación, todas ellas necesitan, para tener sus efectos, apoyarse sobre un ambiente económico y empresarial que entienda el mensaje y lo entienda en la clave de lo que quien hace la política pretende realizar, que es normalmente inspirada en el interés general. Entendido ese mensaje, la forma en que operen las decisiones individuales y la forma en que las políticas traten de influir sobre esas decisiones individuales dista mucho de ser trivial. Todos sabemos que buena parte de las críticas, y en este continente en particular, que han tenido las políticas industriales activas, las políticas que intentaron de algún modo incidir radicalmente y de manera sustantiva sobre la actividad económica y sobre la estructura productiva de nuestros países, estuvieron expuestas, y efectivamente en la realidad lo estuvieron, a problemas de captura y aprovechamiento de ese esfuerzo que desde las políticas públicas se realiza para ayudar a desarrollar la estructura productiva, termina siendo ese enorme esfuerzo pensado desde el interés general, termina en muchas oportunidades siendo capturado, apropiado por algunos de los actores de esos procesos de producción. Y la reflexión sobre políticas que traten de influir sobre la forma en que las empresas innovan, sobre la forma en que se organizan las unidades de producción para cambiar los procesos productivos y sobre la forma y la anatomía que encontremos en los mercados de la economía, tiene dimensiones de economía política que están desde el diseño hasta la aplicación y la evaluación de las políticas. Este, si se quiere, es, a mi entender, el desafío que asume como suyo esta forma de pensar en la que el profesor Dosi tiene un papel tan destacado. Así que, hecha esta breve y muy sintética forma de presentarles la forma de razonamiento y la propuesta analítica y teórica del profesor Dosi, los dejo para que el profesor nos exponga lo que nos viene a presentar acerca, sobre todo, del pasado y el futuro de estas políticas industriales para el desarrollo. Muchísimas gracias.
Pido disculpa, ma voy a hablar en inglés. C'è un trade-off, ma acho que voy a explicar mejor si hablo en inglés. Disculpa, se você quiere preguntar en castellano puede hacer, mas voy a ser mucho más claro en inglés. I was moved by the presentation of Minister Lorenzo, and I'm really proud to be invited here in a country, in fact, in a region characterized by an enormous vitality and a sort of collective drive out of the nightmares of the Washington Consensus as post-Washington Consensus. In fact, I think at the end of the presentation I will get to that. What I'm going to do is to take you through a long story of development seen through the lenses of capabilities accumulation and the supporting political economy that Minister Lorenzo was so rightly pointing out. I will begin by giving you a sort of broad, long overview of the process of industrialization or non-industrialization since the Industrial Revolution. Then I will ask if there are policy measures that characterize all the successful episode of industrialization. And then I will conclude by flagging those that we consider, because most of the things that I'm going to say today are based on a book with Mario Cimoli and Joe Stiglitz, and basically the introduction and the final chapter are what I'm going to tell you. But I advise you to read the book. There are very many chapters on various experiences, Latin American and non-Latin American. I mean, let me do some marketing for that. I was saying in the last part of it, in the last part of the presentation, I will tell you what I consider some fundamental policy prescriptions that hold today and maybe require also some institutional change, but one thing at a time. The long term, remember, a long-term tendency since the Industrial Revolution has been divergence. In fact, the Industrial Revolution has been the major diverging factor across countries. And just to give you an idea, maybe I have it here. No, I don't have it here. Just to give you an idea of what happened since 1917, sorry, since 1700. Estimates by historians, and I mean estimates far away down in the history are always something looking a little bit like voodoo, but still the rough idea that historians give you is that the ratio between the wealthiest part of the world and the poorest part of the world was 2-to-1. Not much. The ratio nowadays between the wealthiest and the poorest is higher than 50-to-1. Okay? So you've got this major process of divergence. But you have got also episode of successful catching up. You had, first of all, England catching up with the Low Countries, with the Netherlands. Then Germany and the United States catching up and overtaking England. Then you had the rest of continental Europe that did catching up, certainly with England, partly with the US, some more, some less. And after World War II, you had also clearly the catching up of Japan, and later on Korea and Taiwan. You have also episodes of falling behind. In the early 20th century, Argentina was considered one of the top countries in the world. In fact, I mean, it was a country that was top in terms of per capita income, but was a non-industrialized high per capita income country. Now, what leads to catching up? Well, catching up is basically a greater transformation, and the very process of industrialization is the very transformation from traditional, mostly rural economies to economies based on industrial activities and advanced services, involving a major process of accumulation of knowledge and capabilities at the level of both individual and organizations. And I want to underline and organizations, as we shall see in a minute. I will enter into more detail in a minute. It is remarkable that all successful episodes of industrialization and knowledge accumulation have always involved a rich array of public policies, at least from the German and US industrialization all the way to China and India. But there is a rich set of policy measures even associated with the early British industrialization. What are the institutions and policies that support industrial development? I think it clarifies to have a sort of a taxonomic exercise on that and classify the variable and processes which institutions and policies act upon. Let me start from the simplest. Policies affect the opportunity of scientific and technological innovation. Yes, this applies primarily to countries that are on the technological and scientific frontier. But note, those that were successful leaders, that are nowadays successful leaders, started doing serious science and technology policy early on, when they were not leaders. Think of the US and think especially of Germany. And there is a general lesson there. To fuel the domestic technology system, even in an immature one, it is important to have in the background applied science and public research technologies. Think of the role played in the United States early on, since the mid of the 19th century, by the land-grant colleges. Land-grant colleges were basically institutions, tertiary institutions, trying to discover new variety of seeds, new agricultural tools, trying to diffuse mechanical engineering among the artisans. And they played a major role in the US industrialization, even without doing rocket science. And I think there is a lesson for everyone. I mean, and especially for middle-income countries like Uruguay, like Argentina, like Brazil. And of course, the institution doing that range, I mean, depending also on the level of development, from research universities to medical institute to space and military agency, and I mean, modulated according to the distance from the frontier and the degrees of development. I think on the first point, on the role of the public in science, there is even a mainstream consensus. Even if, and I'm bound to open a parenthesis, I will open another couple of parentheses on the subject. I come from the session on intellectual property right, and one of the things that one of the thing that was part of the zeitgeist at that seminar was the praise and indeed the push toward the patenting of knowledge generated by public research, publicly funded, publicly performed research, which is the thing that was pioneered by the Bayh-Dole Act in the United States and diffused throughout the world. I think that this is a major damage to science, and in the long term is a major damage also to industry. The great push forward in our knowledge that then became also technological knowledge came in a regime of open science, the one that described the Bush report. Bush, nothing to do with the Bush family, is Vannevar Bush, 1945. The Bush report saying, called The Endless Frontier, and the Endless Frontier was pushed forward precisely by the system of open science. The Bayh-Dole Act is killing that and is distorting the rate of direction of scientific discovery, but this is another matter. Second, what the public policy do is affecting distributed learning and technological capabilities through broad education and training policies. Again, it's non-trivial. One of the fundamental drawbacks of the pattern of industrialization, even during the import substitution phase in Latin America, was the lack of attention of a public universal education. Unlike Korea, starting in 1948, how many engineers there were electrical engineers there were in Korea? One, meaning one. Korea had one electrical engineer. And they devoted an enormous effort to knowledge diffusion also at especially at the beginning, at the primary, secondary level. Third, you need to, I think most countries, you need to get your hands dirty into the very structure, the very industrial structure. You affecting the type of firms that you sponsor, affecting the sector we shall see, affecting ownership. I wish I'll come back to that again with flagging the policy prescription. But remember that in all countries, with the exception of Singapore and Hong Kong, but do you consider them countries? I mean, they are not even a town. In all other countries, major actors of knowledge accumulation have been domestic firms. At least after a stage of development have been domestic firms. Even in those processes of industrialization, like Taiwan, in which the first phase was you had a lot of multinational driven dynamics, but then it came a point that if you wanted to go ahead, you needed to push the domestic firms. I shall come back to that. You want to influence, and public policy influenced, the capabilities of economic agents. That relates to the nature that I was discussing before. The capability of economic agents in terms of the knowledge they embody, the effectiveness and speed by which they search for new technological advances. Again, think of Korea. In Korea, the process of construction of technologically dynamic chaebols, these big conglomerates, Korean conglomerates, were followed, pushed, driven hand by hand by the government with a lot of carrots, but also with a lot of stick. And they shaped organizations that at the beginning were doing essentially textile. They became a major diversified producer in the newest technological paradigms. Public policies affect public signals, profit signals and prices. In a way, what they do is they make, using the paradox of Alice Amsden from MIT, you want to get the price wrong, in the sense that you want to distort the prices of the international market. Why? Because the prices of the international market reflect the international comparative advantages. And you don't want to follow the comparative advantages. If you want to industrialize, typically you want to enter into activities that are at your comparative disadvantage. I mean, the example that we make also in one of our papers in the book is, well, suppose you have got a high-tech information society economy and a Stone Age economy. There are two autarkic economies. At some point, they start trading with each other. Well, of course, the ICT economy will have a comparative advantage in ICT-intensive products, and the other one will have a comparative advantage in stone-intensive products. Well, even admitting that the people in the advanced country want stone-intensive products, which is not warranted, if the stone economy wants to catch up, it has to learn precisely in those activities in which it does not have the comparative advantage. That is information and communication technologies. In order to do that, you need also to distort the signals, because the stone producer in the caves will find more convenient to produce a stone. So if you don't distort also one way or another the signal that the private actor face, they will say, sorry, it'd be nice, but I make my money on stone and not on microprocessors. Policies intervene on selection mechanisms. Selection mechanisms including, of course, competition policies. There is a tricky issue there between on carrot and stick again, that you want to offer early on an environment in which rent seeking is not so easy. And this was one of the major weaknesses of your import substitution period, that there were basically no provision to build also a selective environment. And so it was easy to build a lot of niches of behind the curtain of protection, a lot of niches of inefficient monopolistic rent seeking. And this goes back to to the political economy that Minister Lorenzo was talking about. Politics informs the pattern of distribution of information across agents, their links, the way firms access the labor market, the relationship between banks and the industrial system. In policies and institution building actually shape the very political economy of the industrialization context. And in different ways. American capitalism is very different from German capitalism, that is somewhat different from Japanese capitalism. And those that thought that you had only one best way, and was the Anglo-Saxon way, well, they got their face against the wall right now. Now, given these are in a sense all the levers, the ways and the buttons that public policy can and should affect. Now, how? What are there messages that we can distill out of the variegated experiences of successful industrialization? Are there some invariances that can become useful also for today's policy making? Well, two general principles are the following. One is what my friend Eric Reinhardt calls the emulation principle. Emulation principle is what I was saying before. If you are a Stone Age economy, you better emulate the information society economy, irrespective of anything, irrespective of any comparative advantage, simply because there are technologies that are absolutely generic and enter into the capabilities of doing basically everything. It's like electricity. Electricity, no matter whether you had a comparative advantage or not, electricity entered everywhere, and you need to master electricity. Nowadays, you need to master information and telecommunication and computing technologies, because these are generic technologies that are the basis of very pervasive technological paradigms. Second, there is a profound complementarity between technological learning and the development of production capacity. To put it another way, you don't learn offline. And I'm very skeptical of my many friends that say, but now with a more developed market for patents, for technologies in general, you can buy from others off the shelf. No. Technology continues to be, to a large extent, tacit and associated with the very activity of doing things. The example that I make to my student is, when I talk about tacitness of knowledge, I say, okay, driving a bicycle is a very tacit activity. It is true that you can describe the riding of a bicycle with a complicated set of unstable differential equations. But I don't know anyone that has ever learned how to ride a bicycle by solving the system of differential equations. Not even those that turned out to be mathematicians later on. You learn by trying to ride a bicycle. And by the same token, you learn a technology by using it and by making it. There is not so much on the blueprint, that is. You need to nurture infant industry, and you need also to distort, as I was saying before, market signal in order to foster the emergence of technologically and organizationally competent firms. It is a bit more difficult under the current WTO regime, but it's not impossible. I mean, you need, essentially, one needs, first of all, the commitment and the view that markets are very useful objects, very useful processes that are there to be used, not to be worshipped. We were talking with the minister before, and I was putting forward, half-jokingly, my conjecture that other things being equal, the rate of growth of any country is inversely correlated to the number of ministers and top administrators that got a PhD in the US. And because there you learn to worship the market. Incidentally, you learn to worship the market if you are a foreigner. The market Talibanism is an export commodity. The Americans are much more pragmatic at home, and they pursue a wide set of industrial policies. Simply, they don't call them industrial policy. But when we send our kids there to study, they actually believe what the Americans tell them. And then they come home and they do all the disaster that they do. I think that catching up countries have not learned enough cynicism and technicalities to explicitly use all the loopholes, exceptions involved in WTO, and we shall see in a minute in TRIPS agreement. That allow, I think, much more maneuver than it has actually been exploited, also because, for three reasons. One are, as I was saying, the minister or the director general that has got a PhD in Chicago and is a believer. Second is, might not be a believer, is corrupt. Third is incompetent. Or any convex combination of the above. This has been a major obstacle in having, for example, trade policies in an international regime in which trade policies are objectively discouraged and often prohibited. Into this world, of course, a fundamental prescription is avoid bilateral agreements. Bilateral agreements are evil. The bilateral agreements are the immediate concession of some trade opening on the side of the developed country, essentially the US and sometimes Europe, in exchange of a lot of tightening up of the possibilities of imitation, especially on the knowledge side. We shall come to TRIPS in a second. Some bilateral agreements include the provision that one should never use the exceptions involved in the TRIPS agreement and not even buy from countries that use them. So, in fact, I mean, imagine the Colombian Minister of Finance goes to Washington, say, you have now the preferred clause, preferred country agreement in textile, but you have got to give up the possibility of not only doing your version of the generic against whatever disease, say AIDS, but you engage yourself in not buying from Brazil if Brazil does it. Minister of Finance says, who cares? I mean, this is so much down the road. I take home the textile deal, and that is it. And by doing that collectively, one closes the little windows of imitation still allowed in the trip deals. An interesting example that I think illustrates the Jordan Agreement. In the Jordan Agreement, there are this type of provision. In Jordan, there are 3 pharmaceutical firms that are not bad. One, I think, is quoted also, is floated on the London market. And they do, I mean, they do a lot of inventing around. They use the gaps in the international and property right negotiation. Final bilateral agreement with the US, game over, they cannot do that any longer. In exchange for what? In exchange of a special tariff applied to the delocalized production in Jordan of Victoria's Secret knickers. So it is Victoria's Secret against the possibility of doing drug research, okay? And this is the structure, the typical structure of the deals. Well, the minister was mentioning it, and I think it's fundamental. All that that involves dirt, all I've said up till now, that involves a lot of dirty micromanagement, and also a lot of possible grease, a lot of possible resources that you transfer to the would-be innovators. Would-be, possible innovators, might or might not be. Then you need to have credible commitments to take away the rents, and credible commitment to the fact that these rents are temporary. Think of the 2 examples. One that could be nearer the case of Brazil, and the other nearer the case of a smaller country like Uruguay. Japan. Japan early on told these firms, well, you are going to be protected against American multinationals, but A, you have got to fiercely compete with each other on the domestic market, and 2, you have got to get the Americans on their market. So the protection did not result in any ability of rent seeking. And in fact, a little incidental but fundamental one, lifetime employment was a favoring factor. Because if you have got a sticky workforce and the productivity grows fast, you need to find somewhere where to sell these things. And where to sell these things were the foreign markets. So in fact, a very rigid labor market was a fundamental engine of export expansion. Korea did not have an internal market. So what do they say? Because they were much smaller. What do they say? Did they say to the domestic firm? Look, I'll give you the dollar to buy machines, etc., abroad, but you have got to bring back the dollars in terms of export. If you don't bring them the dollar in terms of export, sorry, you're not going to have it in the next round. This is, again, another way of washing away the rents and forcing the firms to operate on the international market. More generally, you see, very successful countries had pro-developmental coalition. This is at the core of the political economy. And this coalition were pro-industrial coalition that when there was something to transfer to the industrial side was transferred. When there was nothing, like in Korea, nothing was transferred, but the focus was on the accumulation of resources in the most dynamic part of the economy. Latin America, with the partial exception of Brazil, there's been a secular problem of anti-developmental coalition. Think of Argentina. I think how the links between agrarian interest and liberal pro-English ideology, all the way up till now with the fight on the export tax of Christina. There is a crucial political issue there, of issue of building hegemonic coalition, Gramsci would have said. Hegemonic coalition, pro-developmental or non-pro-developmental. IPR. All historical experiences have occurred, experiences of industrialization, have occurred under condition of weak or non-existence intellectual property right. When you had them, they generally were highly discriminatory toward foreigner. For example, in the US, for the first 50 years of the history of the US, only national could patent. Later on, you allowed also non-national to patent, but they had to patent more or less at the same time as they patented at home, and the cost of patenting was around 10 times the cost of an American for a Brit, or 17 times the cost of an American for a non-Brit. Japan and Germany that introduced petty or utility patents to precisely protect the minor innovation of the local innovator, by the same time discouraging the entry of the foreigner. Many patent legislation in the 19th and 20th century had the clause that if you did not produce here, your patent decays. Interestingly, in 1907, I think, also England introduces that clause when they start being fearful of the German in chemicals. At that point, they introduced the clause saying, dear German, you need to produce here, otherwise your patent is null and void. Now we live in a very different world, in which, another example, Switzerland, the land of drug companies, introduced patenting on drugs in 1978, and so did Italy. Now it's very different, because you have got a unified international regime with a very aggressive enforcement by the American especially, and also the European multinational. Is it good for development? In my view, it is either irrelevant or harmful. In many technologies, it's irrelevant. In some, it's positively harmful. And I'd say that the current regime is harmful also for the rate of innovation in developed countries. Essentially, this is the actual regime, let me be totally blunt, is a huge rent-seeking machinery for big pharmaceutical company, Microsoft and Hollywood. And that is it. A major rent-seeking engine in that respect. Maybe one can get around some of the TRIPS strongest TRIPS clauses. I think that one will have to reform it, and the reform will be good also for developed countries. The current regime is a mess. Is a mess in which we were talking before. The cost of litigation in the US, that is what goes to lawyers, is 1/3 of the entire R&D expenditure of US firms. That is, the American firms spend more for lawyers, for patent lawyers, than the entire R&D budget of Germany. The same. As much as the R&D budget of Germany. It's a sham. It's a total sham. The end result is that the number of new chemical entities that big pharmaceutical companies are accepted by the Food and Drug Administration are between 10 and 25 per year. That is near zero. So, another prescription that comes out of the entire history of avoid the natural resource curse. No country in the long term has become industrialized simply by having and selling natural resources. Well, that does not mean that it is bad to have natural resources. If you use the income well, the US have been, the industrialization of the US have been very much natural resource intensive. But they build a vertically integrated industry all around it, ranging from the mining machinery to the oil refining to the car industry that was favored by the availability of oil. So this is not saying pray to be, I don't know, Burkina Faso, no. But at the same time, the natural resource alone produce corruption, concentration of wealth, does not induce any capability to accumulation in the mining country, especially around mines. But to some extent, also, if one is not careful also about agricultural product, if one does not move the filière, the cluster down, also in terms of processing, in terms of the things that we saw yesterday, pharmaceutical inputs for the animals, industrialize the activity and build the knowledge-intensive activities linked with the agriculture process itself. I'm almost there. You need, and all Latin America witnessed the tragedy, a consistency between industrial policy of the kind that I've been talking about before and macro policies. I mean, if you have a policy type Martinez de Oza in Argentina a few decades ago, no matter what your willingness to do industrial policy, they did not have it. But even if they had it, you could not have any reasonable industrial policy. You need expansionary and even better redistributive macro policies in order to sustain the activities of knowledge accumulation that I was mentioning before. The way I see it, this consistency has been more or less achieved in many South American countries after getting over the hangover of with the Washington Consensus, etc. There is still, if I understand well, a problem related to the relation between monetary policy, finance, and the real economy. That originated with the destabilization policies early on, and of course is a setup that is supported by the financial establishment. If you have in a place like Brazil a discount rate of the central bank of, now it went down I think to 11, and you have a real interest rate of 7, 6, while the nominal rate on the major Western market is basically 0. and the real is below zero, that what do? You simply have liquidity coming from first world country to Brazil, appreciation of the real, and on the internal side, that interest rate goes to financial institutions that own the public debt that has to yield at least the 11 point whatever %, and generally does more. Brazil has the fortune of having BNDES, that is the development bank that intermediates the industry. But many other countries, Argentina does not have the BNDES. One there has to reintermediate the economy, but the reintermediation of the economy has to do again with the very delicate political economy issue that is the relationship between finance and the political establishment. This on the ground of the existing ensemble of rules, of international rules. Do we want to stick to them? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think that, well, I've already mentioned IPR, intellectual property rights, several times, but more generally, are we sure that we want to stick to the current liberalization, international liberalization, the current globalized regime? Among several imbalances of the current globalized regime, let me just point out at one. In this world, middle income, middle capabilities countries, say ranging from Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, are caught between two hard stones because they are not yet there in terms of frontier technology. But they have China on the other side that is catching up very quickly, starting from wages that are very low. So Uruguay, Brazil, I was told by some African economists, Cameroon is a high-wage country as compared to China. And you understand well why. Because the Cameroon wages are more or less the Chinese wages. You divide by productivity, and productivity is 15 times higher in China than in Cameroon, and you get a unit labor cost that is enormously higher in Cameroon than in China. Can we stand this? Can you stand as middle-income country that tend to industrialize, and also the other first world country? I would not bet 1 peso that it is the Chinese worker that is going to pay my pension in Italy. Hardly so. They don't have the pension themselves. We need to break up to some extent this regime in order to allow, I don't think single country, because a single country cannot do it, but regions like the European Union or Mercosur to have some differential protection, allowing a fast catching up reindustrialization process, I'm talking about the Mercosur, or not too much of the industrialization process in, say, Europe. This, I think, is also the only condition that guarantees the possibility, A, of more egalitarian income distribution policies. The globalization is an enormous inequality generating device because, the unbridled process would bring all the wages of the world down to the Chinese level. which is something that we don't want, right? And of course, I mean, it is a machinery that brings profit back in the terms of the differential profitabilities on the commodities produced in Guangdong instead of being produced in Milan or Paris. The delinking, I think, is the partial delinking is going to turn out as a necessary condition also for what I call what is, in my view, the only way out of the crisis for the first world, that is a sort of innovation-friendly